Um, so my plan for this morning is to go through the book of Ecclesiastes, the whole book. So I don't know what your plans are for Mother's Day today, but we'll see. No, just kidding. And it would be worth taking, I don't know, 8, 10 weeks, maybe 12 weeks. There's 12 chapters, so it might be worth taking that amount of time to just carefully walk through the book. But I think there's also a value sometimes in stepping back and taking a look at the book as a whole. And this is true with all the books of the Bible, kind of getting a sense of what's the whole book about? What's the main message? Kind of what's the heart of Ecclesiastes about? So that's kind of what I want to do this morning, is to look at the forest of Ecclesiastes and not just each individual tree. And my prayer is that through our time together, maybe you'd be encouraged to dive into this wonderful book a little bit more yourself and examine some of the trees when you have a better perspective on sort of the shape of the forest as a whole. So we want to think about the main message of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is a wisdom book, and wisdom for ancient Israel didn't mean just like being really intelligent or being really smart or that kind of thing. It didn't even necessarily mean being older. A lot of times we associate wisdom with being older. But rather, wisdom for ancient Israel really was about skill. Skill in the art of living well, being able to know how to respond appropriately to the different paths that your life takes. The essence of that is what Israel would call wisdom. Now, Ecclesiastes deals with a fundamental question regarding how to live well, how to navigate life well. And that question is, what is life about? What makes life meaningful or significant? That's an important question, right? Because it's hard to know how to live well if you don't know why you're living it, or what the purpose is, or what the meaning of it is. Imagine with me being like, let's say you're on a sports team, and your coach tells you to go out there and win the game. Now, in order to do that, you'd have to know what the game is and what the rules are and what counts as winning, right? Because if you didn't know those things, it's hard to know how to live well or how to play the game well. This is kind of a bizarre example, but it is baseball season. So if you could kind of like imagine this with me. Imagine you had never heard of baseball before. You knew nothing about the rules. You've never seen it before. It's like a totally foreign thing. And you're walking down the street one day, down the sidewalk, and someone grabs you and pulls you into a baseball game. And the coach gives you this, stick, this bat. And he says, I want you to go out there and win the game for us. And he sort of directs you into this, like a chalk rectangle, right, where you stand there, and there's this guy on a little mound up there, and this guy throws a ball at you as hard as he can. What would you do in that situation? Well, you might duck, right? Get out of the way. Maybe you think, well, they've given me this bat. This guy's throwing a ball at me. Maybe I'm supposed to go beat him down and so make him stop, throwing the ball at me. And you could actually do that, right? You could fight the whole other team with the bat and expend all kinds of energy in doing that. But would you have won the game? No, it's not a trick question, right? No, because that's not how the game is played, right? Well, that's kind of like trying to live life without knowing what it's about, what its meaning or purpose is. You can expend a lot of energy, you can do a lot of stuff, but ultimately you end up just making a mess of things. However, Ecclesiastes is not just about giving us an answer to that question. He doesn't just say, boom, this is the meaning of what life is. This is what makes life, purposeful. But rather, the book is really about the journey, or the struggle toward finding an answer. It's kind of about how difficult that answer can be to come to. In fact, as we'll discover, apart from God's revelation to us, Ecclesiastes would tell us it's impossible to discover what the meaning of life is. But that's a hard truth to accept, and it's a difficult one to come to. And so we want to go on this journey with Ecclesiastes a little bit this morning. Now, the book itself doesn't tell us who wrote it. Now, a good case can be made that it was Solomon. A lot of scholars would believe that. And in fact, if you have your Bibles open to Ecclesiastes, you can see the first verse there says, the words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Now, that kind of seems like sort of a slam dunk, right? Solomon was the son of David. He was king in Jerusalem. But the title son of David might not mean a direct son. It could be a grandson or a great-grandson. In fact, we know Jesus himself was called the son of David, and he would have been 28 generations removed from David. So it can mean someone further down the line. But the book also does say that the author was fabulously wealthy and incredibly wise. Now, those things both point to Solomon as well. But the reason why I bring this up is it's just interesting to me that in such a highly personal book, and Ecclesiastes is a very personal kind of wrestling with the meaning of life, the author never uses his name. Unlike Proverbs, which starts off, the Proverbs of Solomon, you get the name right there. Ecclesiastes, the author never uses his name. Instead, throughout the book, he calls himself the teacher. And so kind of in deference to how the book is written, I'm going to use that title for him as well and call him the teacher. And like any good teacher, this teacher has a research project. He tells us not only like what he's going to study, but he also tells us the method he's going to use to study it. And then he gives us the results. And then after the results, he gives the evidence that supports those results. And he explains his project in verse 12. If you have your Bibles, you can look at Ecclesiastes 1, verse 12, and it says this: I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. So the teacher here tells us he's going to diligently pursue and seek something out. This is a very intentional experiment that he's about to perform. And the method he's going to use, he says, is wisdom. He's going to use the best of his skill and all of his resources. And the scope of his study is everything that is done under the heavens. Now, talk about a huge research project, right? If I were like his advisor, I may be like, listen, you need to like narrow your research focus here. Studying everything is kind of difficult. But really what he's saying is he's going to leave no stone unturned. He's going to try to discover the meaning or purpose of life and look at every avenue for discovering that. In fact, his only qualifying phrase here is the last one I read, under the heavens. Now, that's an important phrase, though. He uses it 26 times in this book. And he's constantly reminding us that he is studying things under the heavens. And I take that to mean he is trying to discover the meaning or goal of life apart from God's revelation to us. So he's going to use the best of his intelligence, his reason, his experience, his keen observation of life to try to answer this question, again, apart from God's revelation to us. And we'll come back to that point at the end. It's also important to note that this teacher is uniquely qualified to do this kind of study. He's not like your average guy. It's not like, your neighbor down the street saying, I'm going to try to pursue this, the answer to this question. In fact, he's a king, as we talked about. Also, verse 16 tells us he has more wisdom than any previous ruler, and he was full of understanding. We also discover a bit later in the book that he was incredibly wealthy. So he has resources to pursue an answer to this question that most of us probably don't have. It'd be kind of like today if a Mark Zuckerberg or a Jeff Bezos said, I'm going to use all the resources at my disposal to try to answer this question. They're going to be able to do more than we are, right? Because they're in a position to do that. So that's kind of like this author. He's in a unique position to be able to pursue this question. And then right off the bat, if you look at the second half of verse 13 here, he gives us his conclusion. He says, what a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. The word chasing here literally means shepherding. I don't know if you can imagine that image, but like trying to shepherd the wind, right? Try to get it in a different direction. It's like a task that's not possible really to achieve. Again, expending a lot of effort, but not doing much. In fact, his conclusion here is even more forcefully stated back in verse 2. If you look at chapter 1, verse 2, sort of like the theme of the book, it says, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Now, the word translated meaningless is an important one as well. He uses it 38 times in these 12 chapters. It's sort of like his theme word. And it's a difficult one to translate. The Old King James, if you're familiar with older English Bible translations, they translate it vanity, vanity of vanities, which has kind of become almost a proverbial saying, in itself in our culture. if you look carefully at what he means by this word, if you study every context in which he uses it and try to tease out, okay, what do you mean by this term? I actually think the best translation or a better translation of it is absurd or maybe enigmatic. So you could actually translate this phrase here, absurdity of absurdities, says the teacher, absurdity of absurdities. Everything is absurd. He uses that word 5 times in this verse. And it's intended to be a provoking statement. We're supposed to feel unsettled when we hear that. But that is his considered opinion. He's thought deeply about his life and vocation under the sun, and he has pronounced that it is absurd. Which is a bit of surprise, right? Because, Solomon, he was king in Jerusalem. He was responsible for the welfare of the kingdom. It seems like he had a job that was filled with significance. He built the temple, as we know. And if he looked at his life and said, this is absurd, no doubt he would pronounce the same verdict over each one of us as well. But the question is why? Like, what would lead him to say that kind of thing? Well, that's really what the whole book is about. It's about the journey that he went on that led him to that conclusion. And this is really important for us because the things that he pursued to try to find meaning or significance in life are the same things that most of us turn to as well to try to find meaning or significance in our lives. So this journey is really of a special interest to us. And now I'm not going to be able to cover everything in the book. I said I was going to preach on the whole book, which is not exactly true. I'm going to get the main message of the book. And I want to look at 3 particular themes that are fairly prominent in the book to be able to get at its message. The first theme is found in this opening poem in verses 3 to 11. So I'm going to go ahead and read that. It says this, Ecclesiastes 1 verse 3. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place where the streams come from, there they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was already here long ago. It was here before our time. No one remembers the former generations. Even those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow them. So this poem talks about generations coming or going, right? It talks about the wind blowing around the compass, north, south, east, and west, the streams flowing to the sea, but the sea is never full. And when you read this poem, you get this sense of just sort of like this bone-tired weariness. It's like he's looked at the world and he sees all of this incessant activity. There's all these things happening, but nothing really ever changes. In fact, the question he asks at the beginning in verse 3 really sums this up nicely. He says, what do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? And the point there is there's a lot of labor, there's a lot of toil going on in the world, but there's no gain. All pain, no gain. Like, ooh, that's not good, right? And no real profit. In fact, he says, nothing really ever changes. There's nothing new under the sun. And this idea, this poem itself confronts one of the most deeply held beliefs in Western culture, especially in North American culture, and that is the myth of progress. And that is the idea that if we somehow had the right technique, if we had the right laws, the right policy, we could solve the world's problems. We could save ourselves in that way. And it's easy to read this part of Ecclesiastes and to wonder, is he really right about this? Is there really nothing new under the sun? I mean, had he ever seen an iPhone? Or what about, the internet? That wasn't around then, right? Modern medicine, talk about construction techniques that we have today that certainly didn't exist back then. The world has progressed a lot in those types of things, but that's actually not really what he's talking about. Certainly we have grown in our ability with technique. We can do things better. Technology, we can do things maybe more efficiently. than we used to be able to do. But that was true in the ancient world as well. Clearly, the teacher would have known there were things that didn't exist before that existed now. The ancient world actually had a pretty sophisticated technology of agriculture, the terracing of hillsides and how to irrigate fields and things like that. They had rather sophisticated weapons of war, and things changed, right? War techniques and technology for that changed over the years, and certainly he would have been familiar with that as well. So he's not saying that growth in technology doesn't exist, but rather he's making a statement about humanity. He's saying that despite all of our effort and energy in producing new technologies, maybe in doing things more efficiently, in trying to find better policies for living, humanity really hasn't changed. There is no real progress. People are not smarter today than they were 5,000 years ago. People are not more moral or more just. Relationships are not more meaningful or healthier than they used to be. People are not wiser. In fact, in our country, in the US, we spend billions of dollars in the so-called STEM areas. You guys familiar with that term, STEM, right? Science, technology, engineering, medicine. And those are all wonderful areas to study. There's good biblical reasons to pursue studying all those areas, but there is an underlying belief behind why we invest so much in those areas, and that is this belief that if we just had better science, more education, more powerful technology, then all of our problems would be solved. And it's easy, again, these things are good things to pursue in themselves, but it's easy to take those things and to turn them into our Savior and think that they can deliver us from our deepest problems. And that's what the teacher is saying here. He is saying he's looked long and hard at these issues, and he's discerned that no real progress has ever been made to solve humanity's deepest problems of the heart. We're all bustle and noise and effort, but no real progress. So that's an uplifting message to start off with, right? The next theme, another area that the teacher pursues to find meaning or significance in life is wealth. And wealth includes both money and possessions. He's including both of those things. And it's no secret that in our society today, we are kind of obsessed with stuff, with money, with what it can buy us. In fact, the way our society is structured, we almost can't help it, because there are these companies that spend billions of dollars, and their whole goal is to try to make you feel unsatisfied with what you currently have, so you'll buy their thing. And then that's how the economy is fueled that way, right? So it breeds discontent. We don't have enough. We need to have more. If we just had more, maybe then we could be satisfied. Last year's technology is outdated. We got to upgrade. Something's broken. We need to get something new. We don't need to fix it, and on and on. And money and stuff have become the answer to life's problems. For many of us, that's how we fill the void in trying to get a sense of meaning or significance in life. We can turn to those things to distract us, to try to give us that. Even in the church, that's true, and that kind of thing often happens. Social scientists, these are secular social scientists, have actually diagnosed our culture with a disease that they call affluenza. I have a definition of it up here, if there's a slide there. Do you guys have that back there? There it is, affluenza. John DeGraff, here's his definition of it. It's a painful, contagious, socially transmitted condition of overload, debt, anxiety, and waste resulting from the dogged pursuit of more. Sound familiar? The teacher in Ecclesiastes actually has quite a bit to say about money. He recognizes this kind of really interesting paradox in life. On the one hand, money makes everything possible. You can't live without it. Look at this verse, Ecclesiastes 10:19. This was a verse I used to try to quote to my parents when I was in high school. It was, Mom, Dad, I have a problem, and the Bible has the answer. Look, it says, money is the answer for everything. Right? This is just what we need. And so the teacher realizes, right, without money, you can't live. On the other hand, though, every section where he talks about money, he ends it by saying, money itself is really nothing. And it's absurd to devote a large percentage of your life and energy to pursue more of it to try to provide you with meaning or significance in your life. That if you do that, that's a bad idea. And he gives 3 reasons for this in Ecclesiastes chapter 5. If you want to turn over there, Ecclesiastes 5, beginning in verse 10. And he says this in verse 10, "Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless." And what he's saying there is once you have a love for money beyond its ability to meet your basic needs, you can never actually have enough. Because the thing with money is it's like limitless, right? There's always more. You can never say like, I have it all, or I have enough, or if you're looking to money to provide you with meaning or significance in your life, you can never get to the point where you say, okay, now I have a meaningful life. Like that's enough. If that's what you're looking to, it's always more, right? You have to pursue it. You have to keep getting more. If you get a huge paycheck one quarter, it makes you, energized to pursue even a bigger one the next quarter. And it easily becomes how you define success and personal value. And again, that is even true in the church as well. I know I am a valuable person because look at how much I make, how much I earn, or how much I have and can provide. Therefore, my life has meaning or significance. But if that's how you live your life, if that's how you define your success or value, it's a fool's game because there's never enough. What he says here, whoever loves money never has enough. This is actually in line with a lot of what the New Testament says about money. You can look at what Jesus says in Matthew 6, verse 24. He says, "No one can serve two masters. For a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." You'll notice he doesn't say, boy, it's really hard to serve God and money. You have to work hard on that sort of balance between God and money. And sort of, it doesn't say that, right? It says you can't do it. They're opposing values. Or in Luke 12, this is a fascinating verse to me. Jesus is talking to his disciples here. And he says, "Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Now, you have to think about this. Jesus is saying this to a group of first century Jewish peasants who are living under the thumb of Roman oppression. These are people who, on no modern scale would we say these are wealthy people. These are people who have almost nothing, who are subsisting day to day. And if Jesus has to warn them about saying, hey, your life doesn't consist in the abundance of your possessions, we need to hear that multiplied about 1,000 times in our culture today. We live in a world they couldn't have even imagined with the amount of stuff that we can accrue. And I could go on and on, right? The Bible is full of warnings of this kind. And the surprising thing about this is Ecclesiastes was written to a culture where money was often seen as a sign of God's blessing. But the focus here is on having too much of an attachment to money and stuff, looking to it to define what is meaningful in life for yourself. And God knows how empty that pursuit is. Well, the teacher gives even more reasons to show why the love and pursuit of money and stuff is absurd. Look at verse 11. So chapter 5, verse 11, he says, "As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them?" And I think this points to a truth that we all know pretty well, right? That when you have a lot of stuff, there are other people that want a piece of it, right? So the government wants more of your tax money. People come around you and try to sell you things. They want to have some of that wealth that you have earned. And when you have a lot of stuff, of course, you have to pay a lot of people to take care of your stuff. If you have a boat, you've got fees to pay where people can dock and store your boat. And if you have you have gardeners, someone to manage your portfolio. I don't really know what these things are, but I hear people who are wealthy have them. And charities come knocking at your door when you have a lot of money. And so the picture the teacher paints here is almost kind of comic. He's saying, what good is your life when you have a lot of stuff? Your life consists of basically sitting back and watching other people feast off of it. And you quickly turn into this situation where not only do you have to work hard to pursue more money to keep this whole charade going, but you also have a life filled with anxiety trying to protect what you have from other people ripping it from you and taking it from you. And in fact, the anxiety of the rich is so beautifully contrasted with the day laborer in verse 12. If you look at chapter 5, verse 12, he says, "The sleep of the laborer," talking about a day laborer, someone who just makes enough for the day, "is sweet, whether they eat little or much. But as for the rich, it's their abundance that permits them no sleep." It's the anxiety of the rich. And there's been a lot of research lately that actually backs this up. Last year, I read an article in Forbes magazine. It was titled, Why the Super Successful Get Depressed. And it was a reporting on a study, and they studied the people who are in the top 1% in the fields of business and academics. So these are the people who have achieved it all. They are at the very top of their game in those highly competitive fields. And what they noticed is people who are at that level actually have far higher rates of depression and anxiety than just like the average person. And it was really counterintuitive because you think these are the people that have it all, right? If anyone should be happy, it should be them. They've achieved every ambition that they've set out to achieve, and yet it's actually the opposite that's been true. And so they tried to dive in to figure out, well, why is that? Some of that is the anxiety over stuff. You have to manage a lot of things now that you've come up with all of that. But really, some of the main issues were the competitiveness that it takes to stay at that level. You're always looking to see, who's coming up, who's trying to take away what you have to sort of surpass you. And the lack of time to enjoy meaningful relationships and kind of joy in the simple things in life. There was another study in Psychology Today was reporting on this that demonstrated that children from rich families actually had much higher rates of substance abuse, depression, anxiety, cheating, and stealing. And what that points out is really what Ecclesiastes was saying. If you look to wealth to provide you with meaning and significance in life and to solve all of your problems, your deepest problems, you may actually find yourself worse off than you were before. The final reason in this section that the teacher gives for the absurdity of pursuing money is that it does not last. Look at verses 13 to 17. He says this, I have seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children, there is nothing left for them to inherit. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They can take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands. This too is a grievous evil. As everyone comes, so they depart. And what do they gain, since they toil for the wind? All their days they eat in darkness with great frustration, affliction, and anger. This is what I have observed to be good. Oh, wait, I moved on. 17 is where I went to end there. So all their days they eat in darkness with great frustration, affliction, and anger. Now, we all know that, you can't take it with you. But it's also entirely possible to lose everything you have in this life, right? Through some mismanagement, maybe a bad investment he talks about there. Or it could even be something as broad as, let's say there's rapid inflation and now the money that you have is worth less than it used to be. And so even that gets taken away. And all of those things can happen. You can have all your wealth stripped away by things that are completely outside of your control. And then everything you've worked for, right, to be your answer is now stripped away. And so again, ultimately the teacher says in verse 16, money brings no profit. There's no real gain in its pursuit. And yet how many live their lives as if it did? And they spend their lives pursuing it, thinking that they're going to achieve some sense of fulfillment or meaning. But at the end of the day, they end up empty-handed. The final theme I want to examine this morning is work. Now, there are several other themes in the book. Pleasure is a pretty main theme in the book. Power is another theme in the book. But we don't have time to do all of those. But work, I think, is significant for us because work is what most of us spend most of our time doing. It's what most of our lives are filled with. And work for ancient Israel included not just things you go to work and get a paycheck for. Their economy was actually structured quite a bit differently than ours. So work would include not just things you do to get a paycheck, but it would include anything that you do to be productive in life. So it includes everything from your job to mowing the lawn, to raising children, to volunteering in church. All of those things are various forms of work. And Ecclesiastes has a lot of good things to say about work, as he does about money. But here's the main message I want you to get here. And this is, I think, one of the ones that Christians in particular are in the most danger of slipping into. If you look to your work, whatever that is, if it's your job, your profession, if it's raising children, whatever that is, if you look to your work to provide you with meaning and significance in life, you are bound to be disappointed. In chapter 2, verse 17, Ecclesiastes laments this. He says, "So I hated life." Well, why is that? "Because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it was meaningless, a chasing after the wind." Now, there's several reasons he gives for this conclusion. I want to just look at two of the main ones he gives. The first has to do with just the transient nature of life, right? Nothing we do really lasts. Most of it doesn't last beyond our death. Some of it doesn't even last that long. Last summer, I scraped and painted the soffits on our house. So we have a tri-level house, and it was the upper level that really needed this work. The paint was all peeling. The wood was getting kind of damaged from some water. So it took me about 3 or 4 days of, you have this big ladder, you climb up, you can scrape about 6 feet in each direction, you have to get down, move the ladder, then you go to paint, you set up the drop cloths, you put the ladder up, you can paint, as far as your arm can reach in each direction, then you got to go down, move the drop cloths, go back up, 2 or 3 coats of that, all kinds of work, right? And I got to the very end of that and cleaned everything up, and I went out to our sidewalk to be able to look back at our house and sort of have one of those and he saw that it was good, kind of one of those sort of moments. And as I was enjoying what it looked like, and it did look, much better, I had the thought in the back of my mind that, 7 or 8 years from now, I'm gonna have to do this all over again, right? It doesn't really last. And that's true for most of the work that we do. If you're a car mechanic, every car that you work on one day is gonna end up in the junkyard, right? It's just true. If you're a doctor, every person that you help try to become healthy is one day going to die unless the Lord returns. I think the death rate is right about 100%, hovering pretty close to there. And I was trying to apply this to my own work as a teacher, and I teach at a seminary, and it's easy for us in a field like mine to think that, well, as a teacher, you can have an impact on people who have an impact on people, sort of this multi-generational thing that can happen. And so maybe we're immune from this kind of critique. But if I'm really honest with myself, of all of the hours students spend in the classroom with me, how much do you think they will remember 5 years from now? Probably not much. If I want to be really honest with this, how much of this sermon will you all remember 5 hours from now? I don't want to know the answer to that. That's okay. And even if I do have a significant impact on a few students, time eventually is still going to catch up with me. In a generation or so, and probably much, much sooner than that, all of my work will be forgotten. And that's one of the points the teacher makes repeatedly in this book, sort of the shadow of death, or I could say death casts a shadow back on everything that he accomplishes in life. But there's actually another reason why the teacher gives for why our work is absurd or not ultimately able to provide us with meaning in life, and it's found in chapter 2, verses 18 and 19. If you want to take a look at that, chapter 2, verses 18 and 19, he says this: "I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun because I must leave them to one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish. Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless." Now, the point that he's making here is not so much that he has to leave his work behind for other people when he dies, although that's true. The struggle for him is the who knows part of it. See that line there? Who knows whether that person will be wise or a fool? And the truth is that we cannot control what people do with our work once it leaves our hands. Once we do something, we can't control the outcome of what happens with that. So, for example, let's say you're a doctor and you help someone achieve health so that they are able to live their life again, and they could use that life to go destroy other people's lives or defraud them or something like that. You think, oh, if only I could have stopped that before that happened. Or let's say you're a car mechanic and someone's car is totally broken down, you fix it, and that night they drive drunk and kill a whole nother family, right? That could happen. And you think, oh man, if only I didn't fix that car. Or applying this to my own work, and I can apply it to my work, you can apply it to your work. In my own work at a seminary, at a Bible school, It's possible for a student to use the critical thinking skills we try to, instill in students. You want them to be clear thinkers. You want them to have a deep knowledge of the Bible and theology and church history. They could take all of that, communication skills, how to communicate well. They could use all of those things only to become a better informed and more well-equipped heretic, someone who goes out and attacks the church, right? Now, thankfully, most people don't do that, but it's the who knows part of it. We can't control that. And that's what Ecclesiastes here is really struggling with. Now, I kind of wonder, I'm not a socialist, but sometimes I feel bad for Karl Marx, He seems like kind of a peaceful guy, very studious, lived a relatively poor life. You wonder what he would have thought if he would have known what, say, a Joseph Stalin did with his ideas. Taking this idea of socialism, turning it into a totalitarian state, and responsible for the deaths of millions of people. Einstein himself was horrified at the end of his life and he participated some in this, but that other scientists were able to use some of his insights into physics to create the atomic bomb. So talk about not being able to ultimately control the result of your work or knowing what's going to happen because of that. And so for these reasons, as well as a few others here, if we look to our work to provide us with meaning or significance in life, Ecclesiastes is saying we're going to end up disappointed. The more deeply we examine our work, the more ruthlessly honest we are with ourselves, the more futile it seems. It ultimately won't last, and we have no control with what other people will do with it. Now, I could go on and talk about other areas of life in the book, like the pursuit of power and pleasure, but the end result is the same with those as well. The teacher says that those are ultimately futile. So the question is, how do we get on with living in spite of this, right? If everything we do is meaningless or absurd, what's the point? What's our hope in the midst of this? And the teacher, thankfully, doesn't leave us with just that message. He actually gives us two ways in which we can sort of get on with life, embracing the reality of what he's taught so far. One is more of like a short-term hope, and one is more of a long-term hope. And I've found in my life I really need both of these. And sometimes I lean into one more than the other, but they're both important. And both of them, remember I said at the beginning, he was trying to find meaning in life apart from God's revelation to us. Both of these answers involve looking to God, but they also involve a letting go. Letting go of wealth and work, power, success, letting go of those things in terms of looking to them to provide you with meaning or significance in life. You have to let those go because they can't provide it. And that can be a painful process to go through. If that's a part of your identity, letting that go is very, very difficult. The Christian philosopher Jacques Ellul put it this way. He said, in order to be prepared to hope in what does not deceive, we first must lose hope in everything that deceives. This is Ecclesiastes' whole message. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And it's the losing hope in the things that we have invested in. That's the painful part. That's the hard part. But when we do that, then we're able to actually enjoy money and work and relationships. We can enjoy them for what they really are, as good gifts from God to be enjoyed in the moment. We don't have to look for them for ultimate meaning in life. We can enjoy them as God's gift to us for the moment. And then we're able to enjoy them fully because we're not trying to get more out of them than we're intended to. There's several times in the book he talks about this. One example is in chapter 2, verse 24. It's the first example where he says this. He says, a person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God. The teacher calls us to enjoy life and work as gifts of God to be savored in the moment for what they are, as God's gifts. So you don't need to look to them to fulfill you in ways they can't. It's interesting that in all these passages where Ecclesiastes calls us to enjoy the simple things in life, he focuses on really the basic things like work, food, drink, relationships. We're called to enjoy them, again, not because they provide us with meaning in life, but because they're good gifts of God to be savored. And that also helps us keep them in their right perspective. The title of this message was keeping things in the right place, right? Keeping them in the right perspective. Like money is not bad. It can be a gift of God to be enjoyed, but excess is bad because that means you're investing too much of your sense of purpose or meaning in life because of it. He says this in chapter 4, verse 6. Better is one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. When you chase after it, it can cease being a good gift from God and start being a curse that kind of destroys your life. So his message is, don't worry too much about the ultimate meaning of your work or what its lasting significance will be, but enjoy it as a gift of God in the moment. Enjoy your relationships. Enjoy your children as a gift of God in the moment. Don't think that they have to provide you with meaning in life. Now, the long-term or the ultimate hope that the teacher gives us is found at the very end of the book in chapter 12. And he says this in verses 13 and 14. Now, this can kind of sound like a trite statement in some ways, but you have to remember this is the very last thing he says in the book. So you have to go through this whole journey to get to this point where he gives this answer. And he says, now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or bad. You know, at the end of the day, our ultimate hope cannot be found in anything under the sun. The teacher tells us to fear God and keep his commandments. Now, fearing God is like the Old Testament way of saying having genuine faith, really believing. Probably the paradigm use of this is Genesis 22. You may remember the story where God called Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. And then at the very last minute, right before Abraham sacrificed his son, God provided the lamb. And at the end of that, God says to Abraham, now I know that you fear God. It's like this genuine faith in God. And that's what Ecclesiastes says here. He's calling us to, you want meaning in life? Trust in God, fear him, put your faith in him, and keep his commandments. So we could actually paraphrase this, trust in God and his word. Trust that our deepest and most significant needs have been met by God and have been revealed to us in his word. Now, from this side of the cross, we could say trust in Jesus, that he died for your sin. Your deepest problems have been dealt with at the cross. He rose from the dead and is coming again, and trust that real life and real change can be found in him. So stop looking to all these other things for your fulfillment in life and look to the cross. And let that trust in Jesus be demonstrated in obedience to his word. So you can paraphrase this. We used to sing this song when I was a little kid. I don't know if you know this song, but the trust and obey. If you guys ever heard this? For there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. That's kind of like what he's saying here at the end of this book. Now, I don't know what kinds of things you've been living for. You know, a group this size, I'm assuming probably several different things that you look to say, wow, I'm valuable or I have meaning in life because of this, because of my job, because of what I have, because of my family or whatever that is. But I know that apart from what God has shown us in his word, apart from the not under the sun perspective, nothing else in life is ultimately able to provide you with meaning or significance in life. There is really nothing else we can turn to. But when we let go of those things and trust in God and fear him, then we are free to truly enjoy our work, our relationships, and lives as the gifts from God, which they are. And so the call of Ecclesiastes would be, turn to him as your hope, which is a wonderfully positive message, but it's also a turning away from other things that you tend to put hope in, to turn to him. And it's my prayer that that will be your heart this morning as well. So would you pray with me? Lord, I thank you for what a precious gift your word is. And Lord, it's easy to take it for granted, but at the end of a book like Ecclesiastes, when the author has gone to every different avenue of life to try to find something meaningful in life and realizes that, wow, there is nothing out there. We need to turn to you and to your word. We start realizing really how precious this word is. Lord, I pray that you would be at work in our own hearts and lives. Help us to renounce the idols that we foster, the things that we look to apart from you to fill our void. And I pray that you would help us to turn to and cling to the cross as our only and ultimate hope. And Lord, we thank you even this morning for the good gifts that you have provided us with work to do, with people to enjoy. And it's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.